Okay, looks like we've still got some people joining, but I'm conscious of everyone's time so close to Christmas. So I think we'll just kick things off from now. Literally just a couple of housekeeping points. There's handouts that are available to download. You should be able to see those on your screen. And also, if there's any questions that you have throughout, please put them in the questions tab, and we will aim to answer those towards the end of the session. For me, very, very quick introduction. The cost of living crisis is hitting the news all the time. Food at 12% inflation last week, fuel prices going absolutely haywire. And this is also off the back of a really good market where talent is scarce. So really looking after your people is A, harder than it's probably ever been, and B, probably more important. Clients have been asking us how can they remain competitive whilst still being really involved with actually getting the value for money, because their other costs are going up as well, and they can't keep passing costs on to their clients. So finding the balance between paying the right salaries, giving the right benefits is really difficult for people with rising costs that they can't necessarily pass on. We've got our Page Consulting arm that does a lot of work with clients in the tech and HR advisory space. They're seeing a lot of inquiries about how they can look at retention and the EVP. So we're seeing a lot of work being done by clients, and I think the amount of you that's on the call is testament to how important this subject is. We're really lucky this morning to have Victoria and Miriam sort of running through their experiences today. I'll let them introduce themselves because, they understand where they're coming from a lot better than I ever will. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Victoria. Thank you.
Oh, first error. Take yourself off mute, Victoria. Thanks, Paul. Cam, if we could just go straight to the next slide. I'm really conscious that everybody on the call will know what Page do and will have a pretty good idea of what Squires do, but maybe won't know too much about Reward Heads. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about us as a business, partly so that you know that when I'm talking about the market and what I'm seeing from clients and contacts, that you know the context of that. So we are an independent reward consultancy based in Watford, operating remotely with a mission to ensure that everybody is able to realise their potential through total reward. So that's really all aspects of total reward. Last night I got a message from one of my team to say that we had just added our 100th client. And really all of that work comes through referral. We don't advertise or sponsor. It's either coming through the great work that the team have done and through referral and through partners like Page recommending us. And for me, that is rooted in our EVP. So really interesting to hear Paul talk about that, because I think it's important that you understand our EVP and therefore why I'm going to talk a bit more about EVP and total reward and not just focus on what we're hearing really, really short term and think about the longer term. So we work genuinely flexibly to enable consultants to be at their best. So none of them had to scrape their cars this morning. Don't know if anyone else had to, or stand on a horrible cold station. They determine their total hours and when those are delivered, and that for us is so that they can absolutely be at their best when they're working for clients, and that pays off. And really I do just mention that because that costs nothing, and other than a bit of broader thinking and a bit of organisation, but it can make a really meaningful difference to cost of living and to quality of life. And really that's one of the things that I want to talk about in the webinar this morning, that there's a lot of stuff, tactical stuff that people are doing right now and that we are going to talk about, but it's almost taking a bit of a step back as well. Can we have the next slide, Cam? So we do loads of different stuff in Reward. I'm not going to talk about that. It's in the pack if you want to have a look at it. Can we go on to the next one? particularly focus on a couple of sectors, but work across the board. Retail and hospitality has been a strong sector for us for a long time. We've run a detailed reward forum since 2015. So that gives us a really good source of data about what just about every large retailer in particular in the UK is doing. So if you do work in one of those sectors and you're not part of that forum, do get in touch and join, because people find it an amazingly rich source of data and insight. And if we can have the next one as well, another key sector for us is the third sector. So again, we run a forum across this sector if you want to join us in that. So if we can take the next slide, I'll just talk through what we're planning on covering this morning. So exactly as it sort of said on the headline, how to support employees through the cost of living crisis, and talk a little bit about what the challenges in the short term are. But I also want to think a bit about the longer term to help you step back a bit, be a bit more strategic, and understand how reward in its broader sense can make sure that you're putting everything into your reward toolkit, and not just base pay, not only to stay competitive, but to really stand out and be really clear what your reward journey looks like. So if you could go on to the next slide. There is such a lot going on. If you can just put all of the points up, that would be great. So cost of living crisis is all over the news all the time. Great resignation. Paul has already referenced that it was a tough year for recruiting in the beginning, and people were moving on not just for pay reasons, and it's important to remember that, because I think at the moment there is so much talked about cost of living and base pay increases that we can almost forget about all the other things that we learned over the last couple of years, that things like home working and flexibility have become incredibly important to people. And there are lots of stats out there that show the demand from employees is outstripping the supply from employers when it comes to things like hybrid and flexible working. At the same time, we're seeing significant redundancies in big tech that I don't think we're expecting. Some great brands going under or needing rescuing, and great to see that both Jules and Maid were recently rescued, but that's giving a really high level of concern. Number one thing that people have that they want from their employer right now is job security. And at the same time, we've got a 10% hike in minimum wage, whichever definition of living wage or minimum wage you're using, which is driving a number of things that we're going to talk about, not just people's expectations of what they're personally going to receive, but also the ability for businesses, organisations to make their own decisions about what they're doing on pay increases. So if we can go to the next one, please. Oh, the little highlighter wobbled there. That was quite cute. So these are what I see as the key challenges, and what sort of hearing from our clients and also from our wider forums. Every time you turn on the news or pick up an app, the word crisis is used, and for some people there absolutely is a crisis. You know, you can see the stories of people switching off heating, what has now become an incredibly cold time, people using food banks. But for a lot of people, they are not in crisis, but they are constantly being told that they are. And so some of the reactions I think that we are seeing is driven by what we're seeing in the media. We are seeing the highest inflation for a generation. We are seeing mortgage increases, and a lot of that is really scary, but it's also whipping up people's feeling about what's going on in the economy. At the same time, it feels like just about everybody, certainly across the public sector, is going on strike over the next few weeks, and that's all driven by pay. So it's definitely raising people's blood pressure, let's put it that way, and putting it front of mind for a lot of people. I am sure the people on this call are constantly getting questions about cost of living. Over the last couple of months, we've seen the living wage go up about 10% in September, and all of the different levels of minimum wage increase in April next year and announced in the last couple of weeks. And that has a really significant impact on differentials. So it's very common for one pay band to the next to have a gap of about 10%, and that gets wiped straight out if you can't put everybody's salary up by 10%. And who can do that? we're in a market where costs are rising across the board, and in some cases revenues are falling, and so organisations don't simply have the ability to put everybody's salary up by 10%, and so we're seeing a real impact on differentials. And we saw that when the national living wage was first implemented about 5-6 years ago, particularly in organisations like retail and hospitality with a very high proportion of colleagues at or close to the minimum wage. We saw lots of levels coming out, and so I am expecting to see an awful lot of restructuring happening over the next year, not just in frontline roles, but I think we're going to see that in head office environments as well. Wage inflation simply does not move at the same rate as general inflation. I'm going to talk about that a bit in a minute, because a question we're being asked all the time is, how do we explain that we're not giving everyone an inflationary or 10% pay increase? So for those frontline roles, for those entry-level roles, we have to. Legislation is requiring that they go to a certain level. But typically, the numbers that we're seeing people predicting for pay reviews, and most pay reviews take place in April, we're typically seeing around 5% for the rest of the business, rest of the organisation. So how do you explain that to people when, again, they're constantly seeing minimum wage is going up 10%, inflation is 10%, and the things that are really impacting on their lives are going up quite significantly? So I'm going to talk about that in quite some detail in a minute. There's also a risk of really undermining the DEI agenda that there's been such a lot of work on over the last couple of years. I'm not going to talk about that too much because I know that Miriam is going to talk about that in some detail, but we can definitely see that for those particularly in more entry-level roles, that they're being impacted very, very significantly by this, and that the minority groups, I hate it when we call women a minority group, but minority groups are more impacted than majority groups. But there is far more to reward than just pay, and that can really help, and that's what I want to talk about in a minute. But if we can go on to the next slide, I'm going to attempt to answer the question, why is my pay rise not at the level of inflation? And if anyone's got any brilliant answers to this, please do put them in the chat or put them in the questions, because I suspect we may pick up on this point later on. But fundamentally, it relies on the relationship that you have with your colleagues, with your employees, and whether they're going to trust your explanation. Because it's not comparing apples with apples. So wages are the interaction of supply and demand of labour. Inflation is the supply and demand of goods and services, and those are fundamentally different things, because if we spent everything that we earned, there would be no saving, there would be no borrowing, and that simply never happens. So these two things are independent, but in people's minds, they're really strongly correlated. And if you are in an entry-level role and you are on minimum wage, there is a very strong correlation between the two, because what we've been seeing is the cost of essentials is the element that's rising really steeply. So if fuel and food and the ability to put a house over your head, a roof over your head, even not a house, is getting really difficult, that's impacting those on low incomes much more. But I'll show you a slide in a minute that basically shows that inflation and wage rates don't perform the same, and certainly don't perform the same at the same time. And some of that is about timing. So most organisations do pay review in April, and I think that's partly determined by tax year, partly by company year, partly by national living wage that we've just talked about goes up in April. But of course, people are doing budgets now, or probably have already done budgets. And so there's always at least a 6-month time lag between committing to this is what our pay rise is going to be in it actually happening. Whereas in fact, we see inflation all the time, and we're getting monthly updates on what inflation looks like, where generally pay rises are only once a year. And we'll talk a bit later about there has been more of an instance of doing second pay rises in the last year, which is very, very unusual. In addition, the labour market isn't straightforward. I feel like I'm reliving my economics A-level here, that there is interference in the market. It's not simply supply and demand. So minimum wage is the government intervening and saying, it's not entirely down to you, organisations. We're going to require that you pay a certain level. So it's another example, I suppose, of it's not entirely within your gift to make decisions on exactly what you want wage rates to be. And there are always hot skills, and Paul can probably tell us far more about this than any of us on the call. The demand for labour is not the same for all, and so just giving a flat pay rise across the board is going to give you challenges. If there is anyone on the call who is not struggling with recruitment or retention, I'd love to talk to you, because you're probably not going to be a client, because I've never met a client who has no issues whatsoever with recruiting or retaining people. And we know that digital for everybody has been a challenge for several years. I know from our third sector clients that fundraising is continuing to be a challenge. So it's really thinking about where you put some of your money to make the biggest impact on the organisation as a whole. So I know this is a really complicated one, and it's not as simple as saying, well, different roles get paid differently, but there's an awful lot to explain, I think, to get people to understand why we're not all just going to get the same pay increase. Can I have the next one? So this slightly pretty graph is an ONS graph reproduced by the BBC. I've deliberately picked a period that isn't the last couple of years to show you that wage rates and inflation do behave quite differently. For most of the current millennium, we've seen wage increases of about 2%, pots of about 2%, regardless of what's happening with inflation. So it is sometimes worth reminding people that in those years when inflation was below 2%, we still continue to get rises above 2%. It's very, very rare for wages to fall. It's not that rare for prices to fall. So somehow it's getting across the message that inflation and wage increases are not the same thing, despite what it looks like in the press all the time. Can I have the next one? So for me, it's just really important not to just knee-jerk, because I know everybody's going to be under pressure on this, to really think through pay review and make sure that it meets the needs of the organisation, not just now, but in the future. So really tackle those hard to recruit and retain areas and roles, and where there are inequalities. We just give everybody the same increase. We've got all the same problems we've got today. We've just spent an awful lot more money to do it. And so that's why I wanted to sort of just take a bit of a step back and look at what is reward actually for. So I'm sure people would have seen this language before: to get, to grow, to keep the best people to meet organisational objectives. And if we go to the next one, how we describe that playing out, we often use a pyramid, which is very much based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if anyone has seen that one before. So at the bottom of the pyramid, base pay is absolutely critical. This is what we need to feed ourselves. If this isn't correct, if that isn't solid, the rest of the pyramid isn't going to be robust. But the pyramid is based on total reward being absolutely everything that an employee gets from their employment. So this isn't just what goes on the pay slip, this isn't what goes on total reward statements. It goes way beyond that into things like, what is it like to work around here? Do I feel proud working for this organisation? What opportunities do I get to develop? Is the organisation flexible with me so that I can maximise my potential? What does it do to ensure that we have a diverse workforce and it's inclusive? How am I engaged in the organisation? And we deliberately put that off to the side and make it look like a piece of Toblerone, not only to play to my chocolate addiction, but because we think that's a really important bit that enables organisations to stand out. Because let's be honest, most organisations are benchmarking to market and paying market median. So most are paying this very much the same. And to stand out on base pay is really, really difficult and really expensive. So we need to use everything in our toolkit to make sure that we're providing everything that our employees need. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide is just expressing it a different way. So it's just expressing the employee experience or the employee value proposition a different way, everything that an employee buys when they join an organisation. And pay is absolutely part of it. It's up in that top corner. But I would really encourage you to think about what is everything that you deliver, everything that you could deliver for your employees, and make sure that that is talked about and understood. Because we see an awful lot of energy put into things like launching new benefits, and then they're not talked about again, and nobody really understands if they are valued and if they're used. So really understanding the total that is that you're offering as an employer. And if we go to the next one. So what's on the left are typically what people would have in their reward package. Of course, that will differ by the type of organisation. And what's on the right is all of those things that I told you that reward could do to attract, retain, develop, motivate and drive performance, align to values and behaviours, engage. It's an incredible tool, really, for driving the organisation. But if we go to the next slide, the bad news is that there is, sorry if this has freaked anyone's eyes out, there is nothing on the left that will deliver everything on the right. So if we take base pay, that is brilliant for attraction, really good at retention, has a very strong role to play in development, giving people an incentive to develop skills, experience, knowledge, performance, so that they either extend their pay or move to the next level. But when it comes down to motivating you to get out of bed, go the extra mile, really deliver, you're going to get paid anyway. It doesn't drive performance. It doesn't align to values and behaviours. It doesn't engage. And so and actually there's nothing on the left. Nothing on the left will deliver everything on the right. They'll all do 2 or 3 things. So it's really about making sure that we're using everything in our kit, everything in our kit bag to deliver everything that reward can do for the organisation. So if we just go to the next one. And I guess, will you just put them all up at once? I would just summarise that as you need to be really, really clear about where you're trying to get to. Who are you? What is your EVP? What is your reward philosophy? How do people know what they get rewarded for? Because it's such an incredibly strong communication tool. I often say to people that it's the way the CEO speaks to every single employee every day without realizing it. So if your bonus scheme is all about profit and you stand up and talk about it's all about the customer, how do those 2 things align? People's behaviors are going to be driven by the reward package. And is that destination on your reward strategy, is that really clear? And does it actually align to what you say your business strategy is, what your mission values are? What we see an awful lot is what I've got in that pink bubble, people embarking on the journey without actually knowing where they're going to and where they're coming from. So if your destination is Leeds, that's great to know, because that's very different to Manchester. It's really important to know where we're starting from, because if we're going to Leeds, starting from London or Bristol is very different. And what people tend to do is jump in the car and head off at the M1 without establishing is that the right vehicle. And we see that a lot in, oh, let's launch this benefit, let's launch this initiative, without really being clear, how is that going to improve the lot of your employees? How are they going to be able to come back and say, this is an employer that cares about me and delivers for me? And in order to do all of that, you actually need to know where you are today. Do you know where you sit on all of those elements of reward, and have you benchmarked? So if we can go to the next one. Then for me, it's be really clear what you stand for as an organisation and what your total offering is. Work out where you are, and also make sure that your exec team understand everything in the toolkit. Because if you're not in HR and you're in a senior role, you're going to know what base pay looks like. You're going to know because you've promoted, recruited, done a pay review for your people for years. But often there's a lack of understanding about everything else because it belongs to HR and it's not within their gift. And so whilst we have a really critical point in time now and some specific short-term issues to resolve, thinking about how that fits in the bigger picture, I think is really, really important. Of course, we'd be very happy to help. I'm not going to present the next 2 slides. What they just basically say is, we'd love to work with you. Please get in touch. We also have a coaching offering, so that if you want to do it yourself for financial reasons or other, there's lots and lots of great resources out there that you can use. But very conscious of time, I really want to hand over to Miriam just to talk about really what she's seeing with her clients, and particularly what some of those short-term challenges are.
Thanks, Victoria. That was super interesting. Just a quick introduction. You've got my mugshot there. My name's Miriam Lampert. I'm an employment partner in the London office of Squire Patton Boggs. For those of you that don't know our firm, we're a big international law firm. We've got, I think, 45 offices in about 21 countries. As you see, I'm a specialist in employment law. In this part of the webinar, I'm going to talk about some of the measures, both financial and non-financial, that we're seeing our clients put in place to support their employees. If you just move on to the next slide, please. As Victoria mentioned, we know that companies are under pressure to increase wages or give one-off payments to support their staff, in particular lowest paid staff. So I firstly just wanted to talk about some of the legal issues that employers need to be mindful of when considering these types of payments. As an initial point, when it comes to financial support measures, employers don't have any legal obligations to support their employees during tough times in terms of agreeing to pay them more. Obligations are limited to whatever's in the contract and any additional statutory obligations. And in practice, the most that you'll see in a contract of employment is a clause which says that salaries will be reviewed annually, but with no obligation that they'll actually be increased. Very few contracts of employment guarantee pay rises each year. Some do, and that's obviously been negotiated on an individual basis, but it's unusual. That said, it does seem at the moment that certainly there's an expectation from employees as well as other stakeholders, such as trade unions and clients and the wider public, that companies should step up and support their staff, both financially and non-financially at the moment, in a way that I don't think we've ever really seen before. There certainly seems to be a willingness on part of a number of the companies to do that. We've seen press reports, and you've got some of them up on the slide in front of you, concerning a number of household names who've given either larger pay rises or one-off cost of living payments. For example, Rolls-Royce, HSBC, Barclays, Virgin, but also obviously a whole range of smaller companies as well. And there are, I believe, a number of drivers for this. Firstly, I think there is simply the fact that companies want to do and to be seen to do the right thing by their staff during what we know is a really difficult time. Secondly, I think for a number of companies, particularly those that are listed, it aligns with their ESG goals and principles, and obviously often stated commitments to put people before profit. As it is particularly important for listed companies who are absolutely being scrutinised from an ESG accountability perspective. And thirdly, and Paul and Victoria both touched on this, because it gives them an edge, it might give them an edge in terms of recruiting and retaining staff in a very tight labour market. And there are certainly a number of surveys out at the moment which are showing that what companies are doing on this front are absolutely a factor that employees are taking into account when deciding who to work for. And it's probably a combination of all of these factors, frankly. In terms of what we're seeing when it comes to pay increases, we are seeing some companies giving a certain percentage across the board, whereas other companies are linking the amount of any increase to pay grade or role. For example, 9% for staff below a certain level, 4% for staff above. Pay rises are, however, problematic in that once they're done, that's the higher salary fixed, and there's an expectation that you'll continue up from there. But they also bring them with them immediate additional costs. The most obvious one, apart from obviously additional employers' national insurance contributions, is pension contributions, which are normally calculated on the basis of a percentage of base pay. So that immediately increases the real cost of pay rises. We're therefore seeing that many of our clients are opting to give smaller pay rises, but then also making one-off cost of living payments to their staff. And we can just move on to the next slide, please. If you are considering making one-off payments, there are a number of issues to consider, and I'll talk through them now. So firstly, is the payment going to be made to all staff or just those below a certain pay grade? Or is the payment going to be different depending upon role or pay grade? An opinion amongst our clients on this is clearly split. Some of our clients are making the same payment across the board, irrespective of role of seniority, whereas others are applying a differentiated approach in recognition of the fact that less well-paid staff are more likely to be less well placed financially to weather the current storm. But if a differentiated approach is taken, and again, I think Victoria touched on this, you really need to think about how this is going to be communicated to your staff. For example, if you're targeting certain staff, you need to consider what impact this is going to have from an employee relations perspective for those who aren't getting it. The really interesting thing about this crisis is that the huge increase in mortgage rates as a result of the increase in interest rates has made this a crisis which is impacting everybody across all income brackets. People on, with larger houses, larger mortgages could be crippled proportionally in the same way as less well-paid people. So it's something to think about there. Another issue to think about is whether you're going to make a one-off payment in one lump sum, or whether you're going to make it in 2 or more smaller payments. We've certainly seen that some companies are splitting it into 2, but others are stretching it even further than that in a number of additional payments, particularly to help people during the deal with winter energy bills. You also need to think about who you're going to pay this to. Will it be just to employees, or are you going to be making it to other categories of staff, such as workers or agency workers? In our experience, most of our clients are predominantly only paying it to employees, not workers or agency workers. And there are potential employment status issues to think about, particularly if you're paying these kind of payments to people who are not directly contracted to you, for example, agency workers. So it's not straightforward. There's also the issue as to whether or not a one-off payment should be prorated for part-time employees. If it's a lump sum payment, it's probably fine to prorate for part-time staff, but it's much more problematic if you're prorating something that is calculated based on a percentage of salary. Essentially, when a part-time employee would have already had their salary prorated. So if you then start prorating, if you start calculating payments and prorating it against a prorated salary, you're penalising them, and there's a considerable risk that you're going to be in breach of the part-time workers regs, and potentially also committing an act of discrimination, depending on who's most adversely affected by this. So that is definitely a handle with care situation. The other issue you need to think about is whether or not you're going to apply any conditions to the payment. So, for example, we have seen some people apply conditions somewhat like those that you get with bonus payments, that you only get it if you're in employment and not under notice on the date of payment. And similarly, do you want to apply any kind of clawback provisions if people leave within a certain period of time of getting the payments? Some of my clients are certainly not making payments to people who are under notice or who are leaving or who've left already at the date of payment. Most of them, however, are not applying clawback provisions. I think they're taking the view that the administrative costs of doing that outweigh the savings that they would make from clawing the money back. And they're also quite concerned about how it's going to be perceived from an employee relations perspective. But if you are going to be applying any of those conditions, it's absolutely essential that you set that out in writing, particularly if you want the ability to deduct the payment from final salary, because you have to get that in writing. You have to get the employee to agree to it in writing. Otherwise, you are potentially walking straight into an unlawful deduction from wages claim. In the same vein, it's really important that when you give these kinds of payments, you make it clear in writing that it's a one-off discretionary payment, so you're not committing yourself to any further payments, and also to potentially to state that it's a non-pensionable payment. So that's the kind of writing side of it. Just moving on to the next slide. I've talked quite a lot about cost of living payments and pay rises, but most of our clients are taking a much more holistic approach to support that they can provide to their employees, and are taking steps which go far beyond this, very much to the point that Victoria is making about the entire pyramid and in EVP. Just talking through some of these, in terms of greater flexible working, which again Victoria mentioned in terms of what reward heads are doing to their own staff. Many of our clients had obviously moved to a much more flexible way of working as a result of COVID, but we're continuing to see a push for greater flexibility as a way of softening the blow of the cost of living crisis, given how much it costs to commute to work. It's particularly important for employees who drive to work, given petrol costs, but obviously in the great scheme of things, transport costs are expensive for everybody. There's also the possibility of allowing employees to start work later, so that they can take advantage of cheaper tickets on public transport out of peak hours. That's something to think about. What we've certainly seen amongst our clients is a big push to publicise employee rewards and benefits platforms, reward and discount benefits platforms. There are a number of companies out there which provide these types of benefits. Typically, they'll offer employees the opportunity to buy products such as high-cost technology or bicycles at a discount or in staged payments. They often also offer discounts or savings on a wide range of retail goods, ranging from luxuries down to the weekly shop at the big supermarkets. I act for one of the big benefits providers, and from talking to them, it's really clear that there's been a real marked shift over the past year in the way that employees are using these platforms. Previously very much used for buying luxury such as high-end technology, whereas now what we're seeing is much more about using it for basics such as saving money on the weekly shop, and that's a really tangible and immediate way of helping employees to save money. So if you do have those kind of platforms, definitely something to emphasize to staff. Some of our clients are also offering salary advances or emergency loans or grants. Again, emergency loans or grants, salary, all of them need to be documented carefully if you're going to do that. But I just wanted to focus for a minute about salary advance schemes, because I've had quite a few discussions with clients about this, and opinion is clearly split. I think some people think it's a really good way of helping people, meet an immediate need, but there are a number of my clients have expressed concerns that in some cases, salary advances could essentially compound an existing financial problem if it leads to an employee spending all their money at the beginning of the month and then being short again at the end. So those of my clients that are using salary advance schemes are doing it on the basis that they will only advance a certain percentage, up to a certain percentage of salary, just to try and stop that kind of problem from coming up. I've also spoken to companies who are splitting bonus payments, and whereas typically you might get a bonus in March or April of each year, what they're saying is they're calculating it earlier or doing a kind of initial calculating, maybe November, December, doing a reckoning up in March and April, just to try and help people a bit more. But again, the advantage of the bonus payments is it doesn't go to, doesn't increase your base pay. It's outside of that. We're also seeing a number of companies who are providing free or subsidised meals and drinks at work to assist with food costs. If you can't do that, as a minimum, it's really helpful to ensure that you've got fridges at work so that people can bring in food rather than having to go to local, quite expensive sandwich shops. Others of our clients are saying that they are deliberately or intentionally organising free work social events, because they're really conscious that for certain of their staff, the cost of living crisis is really impacting upon their ability to socialise, and this is just an ability to kind of helps people get out and still manage to socialise. And all of these measures, the free food and drink and social activities and other things such as hot showers at work, that kind of thing, also help in terms of getting people back into the office, which is a talk for an entirely different day, but we know is something that people are struggling with at the moment post-COVID. We also know that many companies are offering financial education sessions or giving their staff free access to financial management tools or apps to help them manage their money. Mortgage advice at the moment is particularly important for obvious reasons. We know that the rates have gone up massively, and we also know that a large number of people, myself included, will be coming out of their fix shortly, and that is a really worrying time for a lot of people. There's also been a number of surveys which have shown that what employees want, and it ranks really high on their list of wants, is to actually be told about what it is their employers are offering. There's no point having these expensive schemes in place if your employees don't know about them and aren't using them. So it's really important to think about your comm strategy, about how you communicate to your staff in a user-friendly format about what you can offer them. Moving on to the next slide. There is then the broader issue of supporting employees from a wellbeing perspective. Unsurprisingly, the cost of living crisis is having a very, very significant impact upon employees' mental health, at a time when we were already seeing a much higher level of mental health related sickness absence as a result of the pressures that we've all been under over the past few years because of the COVID pandemic. Recent research from the Centre for Economics and Business Research suggested that 10% of employees have already missed work due to financial problems. So that obviously has an immediate impact upon your businesses. And it's therefore really, really important that employers continue to ensure that they have effective measures in place to support employees' mental health. Now, obviously, this is something I know has been talked about a lot during the COVID pandemic, but just by way of a reminder, these are some of the things that we are seeing our clients put in place. There are many, many more to try and support employees from a mental health perspective. Firstly, training up mental health champions within the workplace who are able to signpost employees to the various avenues of support that are available to them. Offering employee assistance programs, again, making sure people know about this as well. And I think emphasising to staff that EAP is a confidential service. I think people often worry that if they go to EAP, their employers will find out about all their problems, and it obviously is confidential. The only stats that generally I think employers find out is usage and not more than that. Training line managers on how to spot and support employees with mental health challenges. They're obviously the first port of call, the front line, and the one that, you know, from an HR perspective, it's great you being trained up, but if your line managers are not trained, that creates a huge barrier for you to assisting and supporting your workforce. Engaging occupational health professionals to assess employees and provide expert advice on how you could reasonably support them if they're suffering from mental health conditions. Obviously a really important factor in terms of complying with your duty to make reasonable adjustments for any employees who are disabled for the purposes of the Equality Act. Ensuring that stress risk assessments are carried out, and obviously where issues are identified, that they're actioned and addressed. And I think also running campaigns, there's something we saw that was so powerful during COVID, running campaigns where members of staff who face mental health challenges talk or tell their story to the rest of the workforce. It's been particularly powerful where we've seen this being done by senior members of staff who've faced challenges. Moving on to the next slide. Victoria referred to the impact of the cost of living crisis from a DEI perspective, and we're certainly seeing a large amount of commentary about the impact of the crisis across all spectrums of society. In terms of male to female comparisons, women are undoubtedly being hit harder than men by the crisis because they're more likely to be in lower paid jobs. They're also more likely to be in part-time jobs, but then have the added burden of being less able to go out and find other work to fill in the hours gap, because they tend to have a greater responsibility for childcare. So they don't have that ability to go out and fill in the gaps with other work. Research conducted by the Living Wage Foundation early this year found that approximately 20% of women in work are paid below the real living wage. That's approximately 2.9 million people, as compared to around 14% of men, which is about 1.9 million. So there's a real difference there. They talked about sheflation, which is the idea that women are more likely to experience the sharp end of inflation rises for a number of social and economic reasons. However, this is not just a gender-related issue. The cost of living crisis is also having an impact from a broader DEI perspective. And there have been a number of surveys which have shown that ethnic minorities are proportionally more adversely impacted by the cost of living crisis, given that they tend to have greater levels of job insecurity, face greater barriers of entry into employment and good, well-paid employment, and also they tend to have lower savings and lower levels of wealth. A recent survey by the organisation People Like Us found that ethnic minority employees are more likely to borrow money, move in with family members, and skip meals due to the cost of living crisis. According to that survey, 30% of workers from an ethnic minority background are now borrowing money from family and friends, as compared to 21% of white British workers. Similarly, 39% of ethnic minority workers are skipping meals to save money, as compared to 29% of white British workers. And we've also very, very recently seen Scope release a report focusing on the very significant impact of the cost of living crisis on disabled people. This is for a number of reasons, but tends to be that disabled employees, particularly those with physical disabilities, have a much higher reliance on electricity, and therefore their energy costs are much higher. And in a number of cases, they tend to need to buy certain high-cost foods. And this is all, very significantly impacting, large numbers of disabled people. So, what does that mean? We can't solve all of these problems, but there are certainly steps that can be taken to try to help in terms of mitigating the DEI impact of the cost of living crisis. We talked previously about greater flexibility at work, ensuring that women and diverse employees are offered the same opportunities to progress, offering more training opportunities so that employees across the board can develop their skills and move into better work, introducing greater transparency to promotion, pay and reward processes, becoming a living wage employer. We've seen the increases that have come in that recently. If appropriate, targeting financial support towards your lower income employees. And I appreciate that there is a lot there to think about in terms of whether that's right for your workforce or not. So I hope that's been helpful in terms of just touching the surface as to some of the things we're seeing. If any of you are interested in some of the kind of things that we're pushing out, you've got details there of various blogs and the like that we offer. Our employment law worldview one is the one that's most relevant in terms of current employment. I'm on LinkedIn, so do find me, Miriam Lampert, and feel free to reach out through that or by email. So over to you, Paul.
Great. Yeah, Victoria, Miriam, thank you both so much for this morning. There's loads of food for thought there. I think it's scary times for a lot of people, and yeah, the 2023 looks interesting, I think, to say the least. What I want to do is a very quick poll of the guys in the audience, and it really is, as you can see on the screen, which of these actions have you taken already? Pay review, one-off bonuses, more flexible working, financial well-being, highlights improving staff benefits, or none of the above? It'd be good if you can literally just tick all that apply. That'd be great. Hoping we can get the results of this pretty quickly, because I know that there's going to be questions. I know I've got lots of questions, but I will hold off to give other people the opportunity as well. I suppose whilst we're waiting for this to come through, Victoria, how does what Miriam's seen in the marketplace resonate with what your clients are saying to you?
Very, very closely. I think, there was nothing actually that Miriam said that I would say that I hadn't seen. I think that the signposting of resources and support is something that is very low cost but can make a huge difference, and making that link between what's happening to people financially and their wider well-being. I think people started to see that during COVID, and it's become more apparent now that it does impact on emotional well-being, on their physical well-being, on their social well-being as well, that Miriam was referencing. Being flexible about work location and time. I saw some stats the other day about how many people are taking second jobs, which was quite eye-opening. So if they aren't able to earn that with you as an employer, just enabling them, at least in the short term, to be able to earn that. Some quite interesting stats there. I think pay review, one-off bonuses, that's a very broad category. If you looked at the press, you'd think that everybody is giving a one-off bonus, but from the surveys that I've seen before, they've been surprisingly few. I would say no more than sort of 1 in 6 people participating in surveys. So I think that pay review is probably down to people bringing pay reviews forward, doing extra pay reviews, more than one-off bonuses. But really good to see the flexible working is high, especially some of the things that Miriam talked about, and that people really are thinking about financial well-being broadly. And staff benefits, I think we both sort of said that a lot of it is in the communication. There's a lot of stuff that people have already got, and it's rare to have any kind of health plan that doesn't have some kind of EAP and advice within it, and often they come with other benefits as well. So I think, yeah, I'm not surprised, I think, by any of those results. Maybe a little surprised by 1 in 7 saying none of those actions have been taken, but it may simply be because they're in the planning and they haven't happened yet.
Cool. Miriam, how do you feel about the results? Does that resonate with what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that broadly tracks what I'm seeing. Absolutely. Most people doing something, financially, sometimes people can't take the pay and one-off payment measures, but trying to do other things where they can. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. I'm conscious of time. Is there one magic bullet that either of you would suggest firing in the next 6 months?
Ooh.
No, there's no magic bullet. If it was that easy, I don't think over 100 people would have joined the call today. There are lots and lots of different things that you can do, excuse me, but I think it does very much depend on where you are as an organisation and what you're trying to achieve, what resources you have available, and the makeup of your population, because the solutions are going to be different. So sorry if anyone was looking for silver bullet. Hopefully we've given you a bit of an armoury.
Yeah, I would just say that the silver bullet is don't apply one silver bullet, because it isn't going to get you there. I think that pyramid is a really good starting point in terms of going down and thinking, how am I covering off all of these bases? And it will totally depend upon the makeup of your workforce. If you've got a low paid workforce, then the approach that you'll be taking will be probably quite different to a much higher paid workforce. They'll have different issues. So it is really thinking broadly in terms of who have I got, what's going to help them, and thinking about it from the perspective of each different area of your workforce and the different needs that they're going to have. Sorry, we haven't solved world peace today, apologies.
So for everyone that's disappointed that I've managed to get the magic answer, I'm really conscious of time. I think there's going to be some questions coming through, but I don't know if we've got a technical issue, because I'm not seeing anything coming through at the moment. If there are questions coming through that you need either Victoria or Miriam support.
Yeah, there is a question there. Which salary benchmarking tool or report would you recommend? That's exactly the same answer to the silver bullet question. It's very specific, particularly to sector. So there is no right answer to that. It's led more by the sector actually than the split of the population. So, but whoever that is, feel free to message me and I'll give you a bit of guidance based on what your sector is. That's the only one I can see.
Great. I think if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to Victoria or Miriam or myself after the call. I think we'd all be very happy to sort of try and answer what we can. For me, just to sort of summarize this, I think there's some really interesting points there. I think the one that I found quite frightening, Miriam, was when you suggested the one-off payment comes with all of these potential headaches if you're not careful. But doing the right thing and doing the good thing can actually cause you more issues than it's worth if you don't think it all through. So I think that was a real eye-opener.
And then if I can add another issue to that, because it's not going into base pay, it's not going into, when you benchmark a salary, you're then not including that, so it makes you look even further off the market than another organisation that's actually given it as a pay increase. Does that make sense? So that longer term, it actually makes things worse, or look worse than they are.
That makes perfect sense, but I also understand that you don't necessarily want to commit to long-term pay increases, especially with all the headlines that are in the press at the moment. I think, let's be fair, the press don't ever sell good news, do they? But what I would love to do, just to wrap up here, is to say, Victoria, Miriam, thank you so much for the amount of work you put into this. I'd also like to say that our marketing team have been brilliant. The amount of attendees we've got on this webinar just before Christmas, I think, shows their efforts, and also how important this subject is to so many people at the moment. And yeah, it's in the news all the time. It comes as no surprise, but I think I think hopefully we've got to, not necessarily the bottom of things, but we've managed to get people thinking about how we can take things forward. So massive thank you to all of you guys. And just to finish up, thank you for everyone that's attended. And let's say, I can't believe I'm saying this already, but have a great Christmas for those I don't speak to you before. Thanks for your time today.
If you found this video helpful for your recruitment journey, why not subscribe to our channel? And don't forget to tap the bell to get the latest videos first.